The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, Chapter 11, At the Window. I have already said that my storms of emotion have a trick of exhausting themselves. After a time I discovered that I was cold and wet, and with little pools of water about me on the stair carpet, I got up almost mechanically, and went into the dining room and drank some whiskey, and then I was moved to change my clothes. After I had done that, I went upstairs to my study, but why I did so I do not know. The window of my study looks over the trees and the railway toward Horsehill Common. In the hurry of our departure, this window had been left open. The passage was dark, and by contrast with the picture the window frame enclosed, the side of the room seemed impenetrably dark. I stopped short in the doorway. The thunderstorm had passed. The towers of the Oriental College and the pine trees about it had gone, and very far away, lit by vivid red glare, the common about the sandpits was visible. Across the light, huge black shapes, grotesque and strange, moved busily to and fro. It seemed indeed as if the whole country in that direction was on fire, a broad hillside set with minute tongues of flame, swaying and writhing with the gusts of the dying storm, and throwing the red reflection upon the cloud scud above. Every now and then a haze of smoke from some nearer conflagration drove across the window and hid the Martian shapes. I could not see what they were doing, nor the clear form of them, nor recognize the black objects which they were busied upon. Neither could I see nearer the fire, though the reflections of it danced on the wall and the ceiling of the study. A sharp, resinous tang of burning was in the air. I closed the door noiselessly and crept toward the window. As I did so, the view opened out until on one hand it reached to the houses about Woking Station, and on the other to the charred and blackened pine woods of Byfleet. There was a light down below the hill on the railway, near the arch, and several of the houses along the Maybury road and the streets near the station were glowing ruins. The light upon the railway puzzled me at first. There was a black heap of vivid glare, and to the right of that row a yellow oblongs. Then I perceived that this was a wrecked train. The force parts smashed on the fire, and hinder cartridges were still upon the rail. Between these three main centres of light, the houses, the train, the burning country toward Chobham, stretched irregular patches of dark country, broken here and there by intervals of dimly glowing and smoking ground. It was the strangest spectacle, that black expanse set with fire. It reminded me more than anything else of the potteries at night. At first I could distinguish no people at all, though I peered intently for them. Later I saw against the light of Woking Station a number of black figures, hurrying one after the other across the line. And this was the little world in which I had been living securely for years, this fiery chaos! What had happened in the last 7 hours I still did not know, nor did I know, though I was beginning to guess, the relation between these mechanical colossi and the sluggish lumps I had seen disgorged from the cylinder. With a queer feeling of impersonal interest, I turned my desk chair to the window, sat down, and stared at the blackened country, and particularly at the three gigantic black things that were going to and fro in the glare about the sand-pits. They seemed amazingly busy. I began to ask myself what they could be. Were they intelligent mechanisms, such as the thing I felt was impossible, or did a Martian sit within each, ruling, directing, using, much as a man's brain sits and rules the body? I began to compare the things to human machines, and asked myself for the first time in my life how an ironclad or steam engine would seem to be an intelligent creature to a lower animal. The storm had left the sky clear, and over the smoke of the burning land a little fading pinpoint of Mars was dropping into the west, when a soldier came into my garden. I heard a slight scraping at the fence. Arousing myself from the lethargy that had fallen upon me, I looked down and saw him dimly, clambering over the palings. At the sight of another human being, my torpor passed, and I leaned out of the window eagerly. "Hist!" said I, in a whisper. He stopped astride the fence in doubt. Then he came over and across the lawn to the corner of the house. He bent down and stepped softly. "Who's there?" he said, also whispering, standing under the window and peering up. "Where are you going?" I asked. "God knows." "Are you trying to hide?" "That's it." "Come into the house," I said. I went down, unfastened the door, and let him in, and locked the door again. I could not see his face. He was hatless, and his coat unbuttoned. "My God," he said as I drew him in. "What's happened?" I asked. "What hasn't?" In the obscurity of what I could see, he made a gesture of despair. "They wiped us out, simply wiped us out." He repeated it again and again. He followed me almost mechanically into the dining room. "Take some whiskey," I said, pouring out a stiff dose. He drank it, then abruptly sat down before the table, put his head on his arms, and began to sob and weep like a little boy, in a perfect passion of emotion, while I, with a curious forgetfulness of my own recent despair, stood beside him, wondering. It was a long time before he could steady his nerves to answer my questions, and then he answered perplexingly and brokenly. He was a driver in the artillery, and had only come into action about 7. At that time the firing was going on across the common, and it was said that the first party of Martians were crawling slowly toward the second cylinder under cover of a metal shield. Later this shield staggered up on tripod legs and became the first of the fighting machines I had seen. The gun he drove had been unlimbered near Horsell, and in order to command the sandpits and its arrival of what he had participated in action. As limber gunners went to the rear, his horse trod in a rabbit hole and came down, throwing him into a depression of the ground. At the same moment the gun exploded behind him, the ammunition blew up, there was fire all around him, and he found himself lying under a heap of charred dead men and dead horses. I lay still, he said, scared out of my wits, with the fore-quarter of my horse atop me. We'd been wiped out, and the smell, oh God! It was like burned meat. I was hurt across the back by the fell of the horse, and there I had to lie until I felt better, just like a parade had been a minute before, then stumble, bang, swish! Wiped out, he said. He had hid under the dead horse for a long time, peeping out furtively across the common. The Cardigan men had tried in a rush, in skirmishing order, at the pit, simply to be swept out of existence. Then the monster had risen to its feet and begun to walk leisurely to and fro across the common, among the few fugitives, with its head like hood, turning about erectly, at the head of the cowled human being. A kind of arm carried a complicated metallic case, about which green flashes scintillated, and out of the funnel of this there smoked the heat ray. In a few minutes there was, so far as the soldier could see, not a living thing left upon the common, and every bush and tree upon it that was not already a blackened skeleton was burning. The hussars had been on the road beyond the curvature of the ground, and he saw nothing of them. He heard the Maxims rattle for time, and then became still. The giant saved Woking station, its cluster of houses, until the last. Then in a moment the heat ray was brought to the bear, and the town became a heap of fiery ruins. Then the thing shut off the heat ray, and turning its back upon the artilleryman, began to waddle away toward the smoldering pine woods that sheltered the second cylinder. As it did so, a second glittering titan built itself up out of the pit. The second monster followed the first, and at that the artilleryman began to crawl very cautiously across the hot heather ash toward Horsell. He managed to get alive into the ditch by the side of the road, and so escaped to Woking. There his story became ejaculatory. The place was impassable. It seems there are few people alive there, frantic for the most part, and many burned and scalded. He was turned aside by the fire, and hid among some of almost scorching heaps of broken wall, as one of the Martian giants returned. He saw this one pursue a man, catch him up with one of its steely tentacles, and then knock his head against the trunk of a pine tree. At last, after nightfall, the artilleryman made a rush for it, and got over the railway embankment. Since then he had been skulking along toward Maybury, in the hopes of getting out of the danger of London, toward Londonward. People were hiding in the trenches and cellars, and many of the survivors had made off toward Woking village and Send. He'd been consumed with thirst until he found one of the water mains near the railway arch smashed, and the water bubbling out like a spring upon the road. That was the story I got from him, bit by bit. He grew calmer, telling me, and trying to make me see things he had seen. He had eaten no food since midday. He told me early in his narrative, and I found some mutton and bread in the pantry and brought it into the room. We lit no lamp for fear of attracting the Martians, and ever and again our hands would touch upon bread or meat. As he talked, things about us came darkly out of the darkness, and the trampled bushes and broken rose trees outside the window grew distinct. It would seem that a number of men or animals had rushed across the lawn. I began to see his face, blackened and haggard, as no doubt mine was also. When he had finished eating, we went softly upstairs to my study, and I looked again out the open window. In one night the valley had become a valley of ashes. The fires had dwindled now. Where flame had been, there was now streamer of smoke. But the countless ruins of shattered and gutted houses and blasted and blackened trees that night had hidden stood out now gaunt and terrible in the pitiless light of the dawn. Yet here and there some object had luck to escape. A white railway signal here, the end of a greenhouse there, wide and fresh amid the wreckage. Never before in the history of warfare had such destruction been so indiscriminate, and yet so universal. And shining with the growing light of the east, three of the metallic giants stood about the pit, their cowls rotating as though they were surveying the desolation they had made. It seemed to me that the pit had been enlarged, and ever and again puffs of vivid green vapor streamed up out of it toward the brightening dawn, steamed up, whirled, broke, and vanished. Beyond were the pillars of fire about Chobham. They became pillars of blood-shot smoke at the first shot of day.